Great. Good morning.
Okay, Shalom Aleichem. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Coffee and Conversation. I just want to wish everybody well. I hope that everybody is in good health, both physically, spiritually, emotionally. Great to see you all again. I'm sorry I can't see you, but at least you can see us. Excited to share the morning with you and welcome some really amazing people who are here to inspire us and to guide us into being the best selves that we can. And that's a great place to start with a chavra of mine, a colleague of mine, Rabbi Yaakov Danishevsky, who is here not wearing his rabbi hat, but wearing his mental health hat as a social worker in our community. Rabbi Danishevsky has worked with people of different ages, enabling them to conquer the various demons that they are struggling with in their lives. And each one of us, wherever level we're at, we've always got demons that are chasing us through our lives, and figuring out how to be the best selves that we can become is one of our paths in Avodas Hashem. So having Rabbi Danishevsky on this morning, especially thinking about the circumstance that we're in right now and going into the summer, please God, it's a great opportunity to give us a little continued mental health checkup. So thanks so much for taking the time. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you for having me here. It's great to join.
Great to see you. First of all, how's your family?
Good. Thank God. We are doing well. I guess struggling in the ways that everybody must be, but seeing the nice silver linings in it and making the most of it.
So maybe tell us a little bit about how the current situation is affecting your clients and the mental health issues that you're seeing out there in the community.
Sure. So I was thinking about that actually in general, but also particularly in preparation for this conversation. And it's interesting because I guess the caveat I would say for any of my observations is that this is not coming from any statistical kind of research or evidence-based process. This is just my anecdotal, very limited sample size experience in my clinical work and in my personal life. But the piece that I found interesting when thinking about this is that with my clients as a therapist, I actually have not seen or noticed so much change in their mental health well-being. Obviously, there are challenges, there are details and nuances that have come up in their treatment plan and in what we focus on in terms of my clients and what we're working on. But I haven't seen that much coming into my office by way of COVID-related, quarantine-related mental health issues. But put that in contrast with the fact that in my personal life, anecdotally, I could say that I know lots of people in my extended family, friends, extended environment on a personal level of people who are having real mental health struggles from this whole situation. And so that to me was really interesting. Like, what do you make of that? The fact that that's probably the opposite of what you might have predicted if you had to guess, right? If someone had told you there's going to be this shutdown pandemic that's going to take place, you had to guess who's going to struggle most. You probably would have thought that it's people who are already prone to mental health challenges that are going to struggle more. But again, this is just my very limited experience, but in my experience, it's been the opposite. So that's something that's
fascinating
to think about.
You are not the first. One of the things that we've been doing over the last several months is emphasizing guests who have a mental health perspective. You are not the first or the second mental health professional who has given that same observation. One of the svaras that has been discussed that someone shared was that they thought that now some of these clients, patients who are struggling with mental health, now they actually feel validated that the rest of the world is sharing in their experience.
They feel less alone.
They feel less alone. They feel like now you guys know what we're dealing with. So it's so interesting you say that because multiple people have made that comment.
Yeah. So I had a couple of thoughts about it. One of them was very similar to that. So I was actually so happy to hear that other people had that observation. That's really interesting. I thought, so one thing I had thought is along those lines, because one of the lines I always say is that very often, this is not always the case, of course, but very often a person's problem isn't their problem. It's that they think their problem is a problem. And that's their problem, right? And so in this situation, there's nothing wrong with having anxiety. You don't feel like there's something wrong with you to feel anxious or to feel depressed by the situation. And so the anxiety and the depression are very manageable. But in the normal life that we all live, if I feel anxious or I feel depressed, but what do you mean? I look at everybody else around me and they seem so happy-go-lucky and everything's fine. So then I think that my problem must be a problem, and that's my problem. So in this situation, that's
Interesting.
along the same lines of that concept. The other thing I personally had thought about is that when you're already working on some of the skills and the tools that you need, this is obviously a kind of unashamed plug for therapy, right? So, but when you're already in it, working on some of the tools and the perspectives and the mental health related issues, so when something comes up, you're really ahead of the game in a certain sense. Even if you're somebody who has more struggle, but you're also from that struggle more in tune with what you need to do when things come up, as opposed to other people who might not be in therapy, may never have been in therapy, don't have that much exposure to these types of experiences. This is all of a sudden a very new thing to be dealing with, and that kind of shook them up. So that's just another possible svara, if you will.
Fascinating. And so how are you relating to those people? Have any of those people in your non-clinical orbit asked you, like, what do I do? Or what are some eitzes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess another unashamed plug, but I really encourage people to seek out a therapist very often. A lot of the typical kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of really good meditation apps out there, a lot of really good self-help books and things like that. I think it depends on the situation of what degree a person is struggling. So it's hard to say as kind of a general rule. Do they kind of need to take stock and reorganize some of the parts of how they run their schedule or things like that, or do they, should they be seeking out some professional help?
Now, how does the nexus of avodas Hashem and mental health, how does that express itself in a time like this where shul is upside down and a person's like, how do you see that intersection?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny. I have a number of clients who, when they come in and they sit down, I mean, now it's all on Zoom, but when they come in and how are you doing? How was your week? And they'll say Baruch Hashem. And I'll always say, you didn't answer my question, right? So, that's become like a running joke with certain clients like that. I don't accept that as an answer in the therapy room. So on the one hand, sometimes I think there's a challenge of people avoiding the challenges and the struggles they're going through by using what's sometimes called spiritual bypassing. And the problem with that is that if we use this kind of spiritual bypass and we don't actually face the reality of what's going on inside for us, then whatever's going on inside for us is still going on inside for us. And it has to come out somewhere, somehow, and it affects us somewhere, right? You can't just pretend it's not there, because you could say the words Baruch Hashem, right? So there's, on the one hand, sometimes I challenge people on the way that they use spirituality in that sense, if it's functioning as kind of an unhealthy bypass of what their issues are. On the other hand, so I am a big proponent of something called attachment theory, which the essential idea of attachment theory is that relationships and a feeling of connection or belonging, safety, being valued, are the most core and essential needs that we have as human beings, right? So if you think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is often thought about in education, organizational structure, so attachment theory really tries to give a different perspective than Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because Maslow's hierarchy has relationships in the middle, right? So we have food, shelter, warmth as the bottom need, and then self-actualization, creativity as the highest need, and relationships are kind of in the middle, the stepping stone. But in attachment theory, it's flipped. Relationships are actually the most basic need. So as basic as our need for nutrition is our need for relationships. And so for me, the use of spirituality, the use of God, is not that it bypasses the issues we have, but it's that God is with me in the issues. So if I'm struggling, the one relationship that is completely unconditional, has no limitation on where and when it can be accessed and relevant to me, is my relationship with God. And so spiritually, my attachment needs, my most basic and most ideal needs, are to have that sense of belonging and being valued. And I have that from God. And that doesn't mean I bypass my issues, but it means that in the issues that I struggle, I'm not in that struggle alone, but there's some sense of connection. So I don't bring that too often into the clinical setting itself, because that's kind of my own religious values. But if it's something that is true for the client as well, then I'll try and foster what I see as being a more healthy or matured use of spirituality in the mental health kind of context.
Right. It's interesting, I think it's not just your own suggestion. It's not just a mental health thing. I think the idea that the Rebbe Shalom says there's one thing in the world that's not good, right? You imagine God only says one thing is not good, and that's to be lonely, to be lavado.
Yeah.
Right. So it's mamish like, so maybe now that we live in the Midwest, we can invoke some country music themes. Right. One of the biggest inyanim in country music is people being alone, and that's the loneliness is the worst thing. It's like, they're sitting there on the tailgate of the broken down Chevy with, being alone.
Right.
And so feeling the Rebbe Shalom's presence can definitely address some of that deep-seated challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then my question is, from your perspective, how does this whole isolation or distance affect a person's feeling alone and feeling lonely?
Yeah, there's I gave a share on this recently about the holiness of loneliness, right? And so the challenge of loneliness is that when a person feels alone, they often internalize that loneliness is a result of being unlovable. That's why I'm lonely. I'm not lovable. I'm not wanted. I'm not somebody that people want to be with, and that's why I'm alone. That's the interpretation that a person would naturally make up about their loneliness. And that starts a cycle, because if I internally make up that the reason I'm alone is because I'm not wanted or I'm not lovable, then I'm going to retreat further into loneliness, because I'm not going to have the confidence or the feeling that I can attempt socialization or relationships. And then when I retreat into more loneliness, now it's going to reinforce that belief of, wow, I'm so alone, I must be so unlovable. And that's going to enforce the retreat, and that's going to enforce the self-perception. It's this downward spiral of a cycle, right? And so it kind of goes back to the first thing you said, is that when we started this conversation, right, that the loneliness now may not cause that self-interpretation, because now the loneliness has such an obvious other interpretation, right? I'm with, it's because of what's going on in the world. So it's not because of me, it's because of what's going on around me. So I think in certain ways, some of that isolation might be a little bit less damaging than it sometimes would be if you thought you were lonely compared with everybody else who wasn't lonely, right? But I guess number two is that, and I think this is a point that a lot of people are making, but yeah, we're disconnected in some ways, but in many ways we're more connected, right? There's less, community organization dinners and shul to go to, and shirim and chavrusas and fundraisers and all sorts of, and work, out of that, and all sorts of really good things. Those things aren't bad things, they're good things. But the problem is we're just so overbooked and so overextended. And then the people that are living, right in our own home, or own surroundings that are most important to us are sometimes secondary or less. And so this disconnection is really, gives the opportunity for more connection to other things.
So is there any lamaisa takeaway that you would tell people in our listening and watching audience that's a guiding principle or a practice that they can take into their lives, especially this reopening phase, to make the most of this opportunity?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's, and I'm sure I'm not the first to say this, it's not any kind of brilliant chiddush, but it's just to really use this as an opportunity to reassess, right? You may have even, just to give the most mundane example, you may be, because of staying home so much, you may have put less stock for the past 2.5 months, 3 months into what you wear. So does that give you pause on thinking about how much time did I used to spend on thinking about shopping and clothing? I mean, that's just a little petty example, but things like that on the smallest level, right? And so what we were just talking about of how many things do I have at nights and how many events do I go to? And even good things, like chavrusas or learning or things like that. But to what extent is that running me dry on my ability to be present and energized and focused right at home, right? One of the things, I work with addiction, one of the things that we know statistically on that create the highest chance of addiction is families that are disengaged, right? So it's a combination, which we won't go into too much now to talk about, but the combination of being a family that's rigid and disengaged, right? So, but thinking about that disengagement because of so many even good things that are pulling us away. So just to to really take the opportunity to think about what my priorities are. And if an alien was looking in at my life, what would they make up about what my values are? If they didn't hear me say what my values are, they were just watching me.
What would they see?
What would they be able to make up about what my value system was?
Awesome. Beautiful. Always great to see you and to talk. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much.
At home and at work.
Have a great
week.
Bye.
Great to see you. Thank you to Rabbi Danishevsky. Great to have you. And our next guest, let's see if she's on. Yes, good morning, Kelly. Can you hear us and see us? You are muted. Unmute 1 second. I think you're still, let me hear it. Can you?
Hello, good morning.
Now we hear you. Good morning. Amazing.
How are you
Great to have you. I am great. Thank God. I see you have a little poster there of the fine state of Indiana,
yes.
The great state of Indiana. What's Hoosier country like these days? How are things at home?
Oh, it's good. It's beautiful. It's beautiful here. It's a good Sunday.
Great. And your kids are in camp during the week, so life is really good.
It is
all
excellent.
Right. So, Kelly Zaney, our guest this morning, is now, I would say, I don't know what the formal title is, but she is really the director who oversees all of the exhibits and activities and everything that the Holocaust Museum here, the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, provides for us as a community. She is responsible for that. Whether that's docent training, exhibits that are coming through, opportunities that school kids have from the public schools across the board. So work on behalf of the community in general, but specifically, we all know that the Holocaust is a Jewish story, and on behalf of the Jewish community, thank you so much for devoting your life to this mission. It's amazing.
Oh, it's my honor and privilege. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Great to have you this morning. So I know that the museum has provided a ton of resources during this time, a lot of different things going on. And it's probably very timely because in the past several weeks, as a country, we've been dealing with issues that are raised by exhibits and themes and conversations that happen in the museum over questions of hate and anti-Semitism and racism. So what are some of the things that have been going on, conversations that have been going on in the museum community about what's going on in the world and in the country?
Yeah, great question. I think when COVID first kind of bubbled up and the museum had to close its doors, and a lot of centers and organizations and people started working from home, we started hearing a lot of feedback and commentary from community members in the field, from the media particular, about just this rising tide, even more so, of anti-Semitic rhetoric, anti-Asian rhetoric connected to the COVID pandemic. So as an institution, just collectively as Holocaust institutions, centers, organizations across the country and world, we began having conversations about hosting educational opportunities for people to have conversations and dialogue about what was going on. And then over the past couple of weeks in particular, that has increased tenfold. With the murder of George Floyd, we as Holocaust centers and organizations have started getting together more frequently across the country to have conversations about what is our role, what is our place, if you will, at this table of having these conversations about racial inequity, racial injustice. And for many of us, we believe we exist purely because not only to remember the Shoah, to remember the Holocaust, to remember our loved ones who were lost and those who continue to survive, but to continue to have these difficult conversations about systematic dehumanization, oppression, people who continue to be persecuted because of their race, their ethnicity, their skin color. And we all kind of agreed collectively that we have a very, very special place in having those difficult conversations and challenging particularly our museum visitors to have those difficult conversations, to recognize their own biases, their own prejudices. Particularly, we're a museum, or the museum world in general really is kind of generally curated from a white perspective and a white history. So acknowledging that as an institution and acknowledging, who are the community partners like My Block, My Hood, My City, and Jamal Cole from Chicago, who are some of the key partners of the city of Chicago that we can bring together and say, hey, we probably best of all institutions in the Chicagoland area are using the history of the Holocaust to apply it for lessons today and what we can be doing. So we're trying to have those conversations with community leaders, thinking about what we can do programmatic wise. So we're not just doing one program and thinking, yay, we've addressed the issue, but how can we continually be a partner in this conversation throughout the years to come.
Fascinating. It's such important work. What do you think the Jewish community here, our local Jewish, needs to know about things that you've been hearing? Because you, as you mentioned, you're speaking to a lot of different parts of the community at large, of the Chicagoland community and even other communities. What do you think? Because sometimes we're not necessarily, in touch with some of those stakeholders or those leaders. So what are you hearing that it's important for us to know and be aware of?
So I think two important things. So first and foremost is recognizing, I think, as a community, one's own white privilege, right? That typically as a community, unlike the Black community, we're not generally walking down the street, right? You can hide your identity if you need to, and the Black community can't. So in some cases, and so recognizing the places of privilege that we as a white community, as Jewish community can be in, and I think that's super important. And then recognizing and having an honest conversation with yourself about your own biases, your own prejudices, your own thinking. And then engaging with other members in your community to have those conversations. They're not easy, and they make it uncomfortable. But I think if we say, look, this makes me uncomfortable, that's okay. And to say, like, I want to have these conversations, but then two, engaging with members of the Black community, finding a way, if you can, to become involved with those organizations in some capacity to find out and learn what they're doing and to support their work. Or simply, if you notice that they're holding a forum or a program, make yourself a learner. I think it's so important for all of us in our lives to continue to learn, but sometimes, unfortunately, unlearn some what we're taught. And being a part of those conversations and around the table is a good, important first step.
That's awesome. I think it's interesting to think about because for us in the Jewish community, it's complicated. On the one hand, we have certain experiences that are likely similar to many of the members in the African American community, but in certain respects, we have a very different experience. For, like you said, in terms of the question of hiding our identity versus not hiding our identity, for how many people that was possible, for how many it wasn't, the narrative of immigrants who are coming to the country over the last 100, 150 years versus people who are, coming from the South where they were enslaved. The conversation, the question about thinking about history from a current perspective versus what it was like in those days. I think it's complicated, and having those conversations is important. And how do we open up those conversations is also really important. So maybe could you share with everybody a little bit about what the museum is up to right now in terms of its reopening and how the museum is going to look, even though we are in phase 4. Phase 4 is not exactly what we want to see. So how are you going to pivot now in the next couple of weeks and months, especially in light of all this?
Yes, great question. So we're excited because we're going to be opening July 15th. So very, very excited about that. But we as a museum have made it as safe as possible. No environment per se can be sterile, but we've made it as safe as possible to install and incorporate any sort of PPE into our museum. So all visitors will be required to wear a mask. You will, as you enter into the museum, there will be a body thermal scanner to take your temperature. If you have a temperature, you're not going to be able to come into the museum. And any sort of area in the museum where you might be interacting with a volunteer at the info desk or in our shop or at our exit lobby are all surrounded by the plexiglass. We've temporarily suspended any large public tours and field trips, which is absolutely devastating to me, because as you know, Rabbi Brand, particularly this spring is usually our busiest season with 10 to 12,000 students a month through March through June. So that was a huge punch in the gut in the heart for us mission-wise. But we're slowly going to try to unroll over the months, listen to the guidance of the governor. Our CEO, Susan Abrams, has been doing a lot of really great due diligence, talking to other museums. Even though we're not in Chicago, we are actually considered as part of Museums of the Park. So talking to the Field and the Shed and other museums and what they're doing, talking to other Holocaust museums. Houston and Dallas have opened already. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans has opened already, so kind of learning from them. And we'll continue to keep our eyes and ears open and hear from the community and hear from our volunteers. And we hope to be able to have everyone join us when we open. And we're excited to welcome everybody back. We've really missed the community.
Sure. As someone who has benefited from the museum immensely, I can tell you how it's an important resource, especially for the Jewish community in terms of understanding where we come from as a community and awareness about our story. So thank you for enabling us to have that. Maybe you touched on important to enlighten, especially in light of what we were talking about before, of the Jewish community understanding the quote unquote other, the other community, whatever label that is, whether it's African American or Irish or somebody else, understanding the other and empathizing, not just sympathizing, but understanding them. But maybe share a little bit about who those 10 to 12,000 students are who are coming in to learn about a largely or very Jewish experience in the museum.
Yes, so typically about 95% of our student audience that comes to the museum is non-Jewish. About 40% are from the Chicago public school system, so majority Black or Latinx community members. And then about 2% of our visitorship from students is Jewish day schools and Sunday schools that are coming, and that's been just a wonderful relationship that we've been able to, through your help and others, build over the years. But what's interesting about it is that there's this assumptions, I think, when I tour people around the museum, they think, oh, only Jewish students must come to the museum. And then when we talk about the students that do come to the museum and that they're finding a connection to what is a Jewish story, but has human connections, it is typically the students that we're getting from the Chicago public school system that are, the Black and brown students that are coming to the museum that are finding the most connections. I work with one school in particular, the Howard Community Center, where the teacher brings her students every year. They're a group of Black high school students, because she says, Kelly, I want my students to understand an oppression other than their own. I want them to understand, kind of the oppression that they've known beyond slavery, beyond segregation, et cetera. And they tend to find, which is so interesting, and even when you talk to some of our Holocaust survivors, the most human connection, this idea of being dehumanized or othered, as you said, oppressed and persecuted, ideas of being separated from their families and the challenges that they faced in life. They're often the student audiences that take away sometimes the most connections to this history, which is really incredible. And we've seen over the past couple of years this wonderful opportunity for students who want to have questions when we talk about the Avian conference, right? Like, hey, let's talk about what's going on with refugees today, right? They want to have truthful conversations about how they can connect this history to today. I miss those conversations, so I hope we can have them soon again.
That's amazing. Thank you for the time. Thank you for all your incredible work, and I look forward to seeing the building soon.
You too. You too. Thank you, Rabbi Brand.
Have a great week.
You
Thanks
too.
so much.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. Kelly Zaney, amazing resource for our Chicago community.
Thank you.
What a great privilege. Awesome. Have a great week.
Thanks. You too.
Our special next guest coming to us from Artzeinu HaKadosha, Rabbi Chaim, Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Chaim Einstein. We can see you. Can we hear you? Let's see if we can hear you. Unmute.
I think we can.
Yes. Great to see you. Shalom Aleichem. How are you? How's the family?
Great to see you, Rav Ruven. It's special to be able to drink coffee together, to catch up a little.
I have my bottle of water right here. I'm all good. How's everything, Baruch Hashem? We're happy and healthy in our house. How are things in your house? Is everybody getting back to normal? Because I know that Israel is opening up more. What's up with the kids?
Well, my son is back in school, my youngest. There was an incident of corona in 8th grade in his school. Today, he's actually home for the first time in a while. The principal gave us a choice of what to do. In a couple of days, he'll have a tiyul with his class, and then we'll reassess from there. My oldest, what's really impressive is my oldest is in Yeshiva Gedola in Yerushalayim, in a yeshiva called Yad Aaron, and they have managed to. You have to be a little bit strong to be in this situation, but they've put the boys in literally seclusion. He hasn't left the yeshiva except once that they were taken by bus to swim, and that's it. They're locked in a small area in the yeshiva. The yeshiva is divided into different groups, and when I went to visit him, so we learned through what's called in Hebrew a gader. I sat on one side with my mask, and he was on the other side. So we're doing the best we can. Wow.
So maybe take a moment, because you're talking a little bit about the relationships with your children. One of the things, for those who do not know, Rabbi Chaim Eisenstein for a long time was a Rebbe in Yeshivat Netiv Aryeh. Now is a Rebbe in the Grus Kollel. Personally, he was when I was a single guy in YU, he was in the Kollel Elyon, a mentor to me and somebody who many of us, the younger boys, looked up to. And now many younger guys who are even younger than I am now look up to Rabbi Eisenstein for much. And as a licensed social worker and a clinician, somebody who helps people, maybe talk a little bit about relationships. You talked about learning with Menachem, and think about maybe for us who are watching, we have lots of different relationships in our lives, whether it's spouses or children or friends, and those relationships have been challenged, but given opportunities during this whole environment. Some things that people can think about in enhancing, in focusing on, spotlighting the relationships in our lives during this period.
Okay, Ruben. First of all, I want to start with the following observation. When I returned to YU's Grus Kollel, as things were slowly opening up in the yeshiva, I was schmoozing with some of the smicha students. And what was interesting was every single one of them said to me, without exception, and then when I returned to our new neighborhood here in Israel, Mishkafayim, other alumni from YU Smicha program all expressed to me something that I didn't expect to be emphasized. And that is that every single one of them said that there was something positive that happened to them during this period of time that they were afraid that they would have to let go of. That now that things in Israel were getting back to normal, and for sure, so many people are going through so many challenges, but there were changes that they were able to make in their lives. For example, there was one person who said, I go to a shul that davens relatively fast. Now I was able to daven at my own speed, at my own pace. Someone else said, now I was able to help out at home with bath time and supper, And the assumptions that I had made originally that I have to be at work or I have to be at my job through supper time, they began to reassess them. And what Corona has brought, along with the many challenges for those of us who haven't been affected by tragedy, what Corona has also brought us is special opportunities of assumptions and things that we once upon a time assumed were important in our lives. They could be reassessed, and that's something that I think is a tremendous opportunity. If I can, Rav Ruvain, I'll even connect it to a Dvar Torah. The Sefer that we're in is Sefer Bamidbar, and Sefer Bamidbar is interesting because the Ramban writes that all of Sefer Bamidbar is a mitzvos that were given particularly for the Jews in the desert. It's what the Ramban describes mitzvah l'sha'ah. And the whole Sefer, every single time there's a mitzvah that comes up that's relevant for the future of the Jewish people, the Ramban says, what's it doing here? So according to the Ramban, all of Sefer Bamidbar is just simply a sefer about our trials and tribulations in the Midbar. And of course, the question then begs itself, why is it that there be such a central part of something that was just time fleeting? And I think the answer to that is the fact that Midbar emphasizes, as Chazal say, that in order to be real people, to be the best Jews that we could be, we need to have the ability to make ourselves hefker. Now, some understand that in dramatic terms, to make ourselves hefker, somehow that we have to be the most modest people in the world, that we have to be willing to let go of all of our material possessions. It could very well be that on a very basic level, that the word making ourselves hefker means the ability to be able to let go of certain assumptions that we made in our lives. So we made certain assumptions, and now is an opportunity to reassess those assumptions that we've made. You know, crisis is opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to reassess certain things that we've assumed, and that would be a new understanding of all Chamishei Chumshei Torah. Bereishis HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls out to the world with a mandate. Shmos, he gives Klal Yisrael its identity. Vayikra, he calls Klal Yisrael towards him. And you would have expected that the next Sefer be Dvarim. Eila Hadvarim. These are the words of Hashem. But no, there's one thing that comes prior to being able to internalize that. And that is Bamidbar, being able to be capable of adjusting and letting go of certain assumptions that we've made. And we become better people when we're able to do that.
It's interesting you say that because this past week we have a young professionals group of guys who are, let's say, in their 30s. And we had a get together the other night. We were sitting around in someone's backyard and, you know, distant with the mask, the whole thing. And people were reflecting in a circle about aspects of coronavirus and how it's affected their lives. And one person made that exact observation. We had a conversation about the bracha of Matir Asurim. You know, we have things that we feel were asur. We're chained. We have to do it.
Exactly.
And it turns out their bonus shalom was matur that, you know, all of a sudden, and someone said, you know, I thought I had to be at work until 7 o'clock. The guy says, you know what, turns out I didn't have to be at work until 7 o'clock. So how to concretize that is going to be the next challenge.
Correct.
And what about maybe a couple of reflections on a shalom bias perspectives during this time, or maybe coming out of this time? You know, for those who know, Rabbi Eisenstein has been giving many shiurim and vadim for couples thinking about life through a shalom bias lens. So any shalom bias thoughts that you think are specifically pertinent for this time?
Well, one of the most challenging parts of being at home with our families during this time is the midah of savlanut, is the ability for us to be patient with each other. I'll give you an example of where I wasn't patient. My wife asked me a question, and I began answering a question, and she said to me, Chaim, I didn't finish the question yet. That wasn't the question I meant to ask.
Now, I'll just interject and say that Rebbetzin Aliza Eisenstein is a tzaddikus, so it should just be put in context. We're talking two righteous people in this conversation.
Right. She's
I
the
know both.
tzaddikus in the story. Rav Ruvain also is a distant relative of my wife,
That's
and
right.
we're very proud. My wife hardly ever tunes into any, or doesn't always have the opportunity to tune into every conversation that I have with people. But she said if it's Rav Ruvain, she's gotta watch this. So I said this story in another instance when she wasn't watching. I've apologized since, and I realized that that's a midah that we need to work on. Now, how do we work on it? I think it gets to particularly in soul searching within myself. I think it gets to a very, very important point of how we communicate. Roseanne Barr said that listening is something I do when I'm waiting for my turn to speak. Actually, it's appropriate for one great talk show host to another. So, so I read this in Reader's Digest. I didn't see it on television.
Good.
But so the point is she was making actually a very, very, in her vulgar way, was making a very, very profound point. And the point being that a lot of times we think that when we're communicating in a healthy and productive way, that means we're articulating in a productive way. That means we're understanding our feelings well and we're expressing them. But in fact, what we know today, what we might not have known 25 years ago, is that the most important part of communication is actually not speaking in a productive manner, but rather the most important part is the ability to be able to listen to what someone else is saying. There was a famous psychologist when I was doing my work in Columbia. By the way, I never finished. I fell in love with learning with the guys in YU too much, and I fell in love with learning and teaching. But I did do work in Columbia, and when I did do my work in Columbia, there was what was emphasized at the time was client-centered therapy. And the founder of it was Carl Rogers. And what Rogers emphasized was that the greatest gift a therapist could give, and Carl Rogers at the time was charging $1,000 for people on the Upper East Side an hour to do this. And all Carl Rogers did in therapy was he basically repeated to his clients what they were saying in a profound way, where he showed that he heard the emotion that was behind what they were saying. And that is something that is extremely important. If we would listen to our spouses till the end of the sentence and then try to truly hear what they're saying to the end, to really, really try to be able to give them the opportunity to find a place to express their emotions and show them that we've heard their emotions, then we could elevate our marriages and our relationships with our children to a much better place.
When I was in REITs in Dr. Pelkovitz's, one of his many classes, I had this list to take basically every class he gave and then try to take it again. We did the speaker listener exercise, kind of what you're talking about, where we would actually role play as a husband and a wife, actually listen, and then give the other person a chance to talk, repeat what that person is saying, the speaker listener technique. I still remember we did that.
It's interesting. I do that also, but I don't even bother doing it with the smicha guys anymore. In the Grus Kollel, there's also, in this building, in YU's building, there's also Torah Shraga. So what I do now is I do it with the Shana Bet guys. In other words, this I have to give credit to Rabbi Bina from Netiv Aryeh, is that he emphasized that we have to be talking about Shalom Bayis not when the issue already has hit the fan. We have to be talking about Shalom Bayis way before the challenges begin. And therefore, I agree and I encourage that we should be talking about Shalom Bayis already when boys and girls are in yeshiva in Israel. And we daven that Emir Hashem, our young men and young women will be in Eretz Yisrael. I can't imagine the landscape in America if our young men and young women can't come to learn in Eretz Yisrael. We have to really, really daven for that. and maybe even earlier, but definitely already when they're coming to Israel to study, to begin talking about Shalom Bayis and about relationships and so on. All of these books that are behind me are, I'll be very, very blunt, are really worthless if we haven't really inculcated these basic components of relationships and communication and so on.
And hopefully for those who are home with children, we can, it's not perfect, I can say certainly from my perspective, it's not perfect in my experience, but being able to be a model for our children of that and working on ourselves. And when we make mistakes and fall short, to own those mistakes and grow so that we can model that for our children when they're in our homes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for the time. What a joy and a zchus to spend this morning together. Say hi to Elisa. Thank you so much. Be gesund. Look forward to seeing you, Mirz Hashem, soon again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Rav Ruvain. I'm looking forward to seeing you back in Eretz Yisrael. You've done so much for Eretz Yisrael. I remember how you founded and brought us to Eretz Yisrael during the period of the Intifada, Operation Torah Shield 2, and you continue to do so much for Eretz Yisrael. And looking forward to Be'ez Hashem keeping the kesher and all of that.
Amen. 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 Thank you so much. Have a great day. Be well. Enjoy. Have a good week. Amen. Thanks so much. Special person, Rabbi Chaim Eisenstein. And our final guest this morning, just down the block. Let's see. Can we see and hear you? The dining room looks as wonderful and fresh as always. Rabbi Greenland, it's Sunday morning. It's another week. Baruch Hashem. How are you?
Fantastic, Rabbi Brand. Great to see you.
All right. For those who don't know, I'm not going to divulge my own personal friendship and connection with Rabbi Micha Greenland, but on a professional level, as someone who has supported the Kollel and been involved for so many years, how much Hakaras Hatov we have to Rabbi Greenland, who is the international director of NCSY, not just the director of NCSY on Fitch or in West Rogers Park or in Chicagoland or the United States, but international. What an honor it is to have the opportunity to spend a couple minutes this morning and to share with people in the community what it is that NCSY does and has been doing, the incredible, amazing stuff that NCSY has been doing for our teens during this very unusual time. So thank you for taking the time, and thanks for giving us a little bit of an insight for those who don't have teens at home or don't know what NCSY has been up to. An amazing.
Appreciate it so much, Rabbi Brand. The times have been challenging for everybody, without question. I just have been blown away by the ingenuity and the creativity of our staff, who pivoted on a dime 3.5 months ago and began identifying not just how to move our in-person programming to virtual, but what opportunities this new platform can avail itself of and can allow for. So the opportunities to really bring in speakers as you're doing here from all over the world to address our teens and to engage in conversations with teens, as well as some collaborations with teens from across the country. We did a Haggadah called the Quarantine Haggadah right before Pesach, which was a collaboration of a couple of dozen different high schools, including public school students and many yeshiva high schools from across the country. And a similar project, there was a collaboration of over 30 yeshiva high schools, Pirkei Avot project that's going to be released shortly. Shavuos in a box, which was something that was distributed to over 2,500 households around Shavuos time. And we really have, in an incredible fashion, had everything that's happening that otherwise would have been happening live in person has moved to this platform, and it's been happening virtually for the last several months.
So it's really amazing. How do you find that the kids, the teens themselves, are engaging? Are they, at this point, are they zoomed out? Are they very into the Zoom? Like, how do you what is it like for the teens now?
There's no question that they're tired of just a virtual forum, and that's really why we're doing everything that we possibly can as we head into the summer, within the medical guidance that's allowed, and within the government restrictions that are allowed, to be able to convene in-person programming. Our summer programs are usually the highlight of the year, where we take some 1,500 plus kids to Israel in the summer. That's not happening this summer, and the live in-person interactions across the ocean in Israel are unfortunately not what's going to be taking place. But what is taking place is in 20 plus different communities, local programming, where in groups of 10, and in some cases socially distanced, and based on whatever the guidance is at the time, to have kids engaging in chesed, engaging in learning, engaging in some type of competitive recreation on a daily basis or multiple times a week, and that's been under the banner of the OU's project community that NCSY has taken a leadership stake in putting together. And this is going to be happening in Chicago and in Toronto and in Baltimore and in New York and New Jersey and Miami and Los Angeles, and approximately a couple dozen communities across the United States and Canada.
Really amazing. And you mentioned how NCSY is part of the broader OU umbrella. We had Rabbi Hauer on a couple of weeks ago. We had Moshe Bain a couple of weeks before that. And as part of the OU and as the leader of NCSY, you've had the opportunity to work with many poskim. I know from our conversations, interacting and getting guidance from them. What has it been like to be part of those conversations with Rav Schechter and Rav Willig and Rav Asher Weiss and others? Like, what is that like?
It's incredible, the sensitivity that they have to everything that is brought their way, and the recognition that there are significant competing concerns that have to be balanced, and it's a very difficult needle to thread, and that they are so thoughtful and so committed to. On the one hand, you have kids who have been cooped up for months and desperately need some type of social interaction just for their emotional well-being, their educational well-being, their religious well-being, their psychological well-being. It's so important that we be able to do things in person, and we've had the poskim encouraging that as much as possible. And that was really, it's been with one voice. They've been very strong in encouraging that. On the other hand, recognizing that there's an ongoing situation of sakana, that this virus has not gone away, and that we need to be exceedingly cautious, and balancing those concerns is not something that can be taken lightly. And so it's been such a blessing to have the guidance of the poskim in that regard.
I'm sure there's a lot of tension in that, because you have some people, I'm sure, as it relates, let's say, to shul openings, people say too fast, other people say too slow, too much, too little. So figuring out that balance is super complicated. So how does it break down? Maybe just give people some insight, because you pointed out that it exists it's on a local level. So for those who are not familiar with NCSY, maybe just give people a little bit of a sense of how what you do on a national level trickles down to the local regions and the cities where people are living and raising their kids.
100%. So NCSY is the breadth and scope is pretty remarkable. We reached 28,000 teens in North America this past year, and that is through approximately 175 different full-time staff people, which is a mind-boggling number, thank God. And so on a national level, we're really trying to stay out of the weeds and focus as much as possible on the vision for the organization. What does Klal Yisrael need, and trying to articulate a vision that can then be implemented on a local level. We have 12 regional directors in North America, including Rav Dani Schwartz here in the Midwest, who's based here in Chicago. And each of those regional directors have the responsibility to then implement that national vision on a local level. So it was very clear to us, going back to around Pesach, that we needed to be planning on multiple contingencies for the summer. What would happen if we can run our programs in Israel as originally planned? That was plan A. What happens if we can gather on an overnight basis, but not in Israel? That was plan B. What happens if we can travel throughout the United States? And slowly but surely, each of these became not so viable. And it became clear that the options, call them F and G, which is what we're up to now, are local programming on a community by community basis, and then virtual programming, where we are running programming over Zoom in the summer, called NCSY Summer Global, and running one of our programs is a performing arts camp, Camp Maor, and they're running Maor at Home for girls this summer with training and dance and drama and performing arts, voice. So each of these are things that we in some cases are conceived of locally, bubble up nationally, and then are distributed and envisioned to each of the local regions and chapters. And in some cases, as a concept, in the case of this OU project community, was a concept of our president, Moshe Bain, and executive vice president, incoming executive vice president, Rabbi Hauer. And then we had committees around the country working on what this could look like, community by community by community. The implementation is decidedly local, even if the concept may have been germinating nationally.
Amazing. And any insight into something local that we should keep an eye out for any of the Chicagoland people who are watching and listening, what we should be aware of?
These past few months have been really akin to trying to drive a car at 60 plus miles an hour while building the car at the same time. Not exactly the way we like to do things, where we've fully fleshed out a concept and then we advertise it, and everything's ready to go. We're sort of building it and as we're advertising it at the same time in this instance. So there is a website that everybody can check out, pc20.org. Is the OU's project community website, and you can search for local community. Chicago has some things up there right now, but those are actually in development as we speak. So the intention is that we're going to update that website for Chicago watchers and interested parties. You can check back every couple of days this week, and we expect that to be formally launching very soon.
Amazing. Well, I know this has been an exhausting and nonstop, tireless Yom V'Layla effort that you've put in for our teens locally and for teens around the country and around the world. So on behalf of all the parents' unions, we say thank you, and Hatzlacha Siyata D'Shmaya, Sayad Rivki, and we thank you for the time, just the incredible work that NCSY is doing.
B'simcha. Thanks for having me on. Best to Nechama, and B'Hatzlacha Rabba with all the Kolos programming.
Amen. Thank you. And thank you to Rabbi Greenland. What an amazing morning. We had the opportunity to hear from Rabbi Danishevsky and think about what it means as one of his ta'aras about not being alone, about being together with the Ribbono Shel Olam, and that addressing our feelings and our concerns during this time. We had a chance to hear from Kelly Zaney, and for Kelly to reflect on what it means to be part of a global community and the issues of the complex and sensitive and difficult conversations, but the issues of racism and anti-Semitism and the other, and having conversations about what's going on in the world and how important that is. Rav Chaim Eisenstein talking about concepts of relationships and thinking about how we listen to others during this time. And finally, with Rabbi Greenland sharing with us the incredible work that NCSY is doing, and the idea that every challenge also, it calls upon us to think bigger and to create and innovate in ways that are really meaningful to people, and especially in teams which are at such a crucial stage of development. So we thank all of our guests this morning. We thank you for watching. Mirz Hashem, we are going to have 2 more installments of this following week, July 5th, and then July 12th will be our last Sunday morning coffee and conversation for this season, for the summer. So I thank everybody for listening. Shavuot